Hey everyone, Andrew Ragas, Northwoods Bass Fishing Adventures, and also representing of the brand. So I just finished a smallmouth video, did a smallmouth show and tell on rods, so I figured let's separate it and do one for largemouth rods as well. Rods that you will want to consider using during the spring season. So currently outside, the Northwoods just got hammered with 12 to 18 inches of snow, and then where my office is down here in northern Illinois, it's still very yucky, and there hasn't been much fishing opportunity yet for us. So I figured what a good time it would be to spend an afternoon talking about my favorite rods. So behind me, I have a few rods that I would like to showcase for largemouth. On the contrary to smallmouth fishing, which does tend to require more specialized gear and equipment, largemouths, on the other hand, are not picky eaters. You don't need a million rod and reels for very specific specifications in order to get the job done. So my largemouth fishing, on the other hand, is far more simplified. I tend to favor more multi-purpose outfits and rod choices that can handle multiple jobs. So that's really my philosophy here. So if you stay tuned, I'm going to showcase the four behind me. I'll talk about all their specifications and their needs and how they best suit me and the type of fishing that we like to do in the Northwoods. We're going to begin by showcasing two multi-purpose outfits that I really rely upon heavily during the spring season, whether it's post-ice out and all throughout the months of April and May up until the spawning time happens. So the first rods that I'm going to pull out, they're both 7-foot medium heavy fast models. So the first rod that I've lifted up and pulled out is my all-time favorite, the Mojo Bass Jigging Baits. This is a 7'1" medium heavy fast action rod. And what I tend to do with the standard 7-foot medium heavy fast action is it's going to be my all-purpose rod. So springtime fishing, again, we rely upon heavily on horizontal baits, search baits. So these would consist of spinner baits, swim jigs, maybe even square bill crankbaits, jig baits, and baits that move, even paddle tails too. These rods handle paddle tails very well. So this rod right here, it's my do-it-all rod. It tends to fish both heavy and light, which is one of the unique aspects about it. So it's got the adequate power and prototypical of the Mojo Bass rods, and even the next one that I'm going to show, which is the Victory, you've got that faster action flex, which is very critical on baits that are horizontal moving, and also if you're fishing with treble hooks too. So it serves as your shock absorber, and that's where you're going to get all that power and your hook sets as well. So fish aren't lost from far out or near in. But this rod right here, it fishes beautifully in early season. One of the nice things about fishing up north for largemouth there's ice out happening in April, but typically it's going to be within the first week of May. And all throughout that first month of the season, we're not fishing in heavy cover. It's just not fully established. The weed growth is minimal to none. And where a lot of those largemouth like to go in early season, it's going to be near shore, but they're going to associate to any leftover dead cover from the year prior, or they're going to relate heavily to wood or mud bottom muck bays where they can just lay, rest, feed, and be most comfortable at. These are going to also be your typical warming sections and pockets of the lake that just harbor all that warm water that's blown into it, and that in turn is what's going to attract those fish into visiting those areas. But this time of year, cover isn't fully developed, the weed growth is low. You definitely don't need heavy flipping sticks quite yet, and you also don't need rods that are heavier than this. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about early season largemouth fishing. You don't need heavy power action rods like the dock snipers. You don't need the flipping rod, and you can just get by with your standby 7-foot medium heavy rod that can handle everything for you. So this rod right here, I have it spooled up with a 6:3:1 gear ratio bait caster. My main line is 20-pound Cortland Master braid on this, and I do like the braid for working swim jigs. Very critical and important for any jig style baits to work a main line of braided line just like this. And in the event that I do need to use fluorocarbon leader, if you're fishing pikey water, you don't want them to bite off your jig and swim away with a $5 to $10 bait. What I like to do on those types of waters, I'll attach a 16 to 20 pound fluorocarbon leader. You only need like a 6 to 10 inch section of leader attached to your main line and then to link up with your bait, and that'll prevent bite-offs that can be very common if you're fishing a water that hosts a combination of largemouth and pike, and that's very common on a lot of our Northwoods lakes. So you do want a rod that doesn't break the bank, doesn't cost a fortune, it'll last a long time and be extremely very durable too for how you want to fish. And if you are a rough housing type of angler where you just beat up on your equipment, this is going to be my top recommendation for you. The jig and baits, and the specs are right there. Mojo casting 7-1 medium heavy fast. Next rod on deck is going to be another one of those all-purpose, dual-purpose, dual-action type of rods that you can just do absolutely everything and anything with. This one right here is a 7-foot-1 medium heavy fast Victory. This is labeled as the Grunt. When I first started using the Victory rods nearly 3 years ago, the Grunt was one of the first models I ever got. And what I favored with this rod, especially at the time, was working topwater baits and then jigging baits, so downsized finesse football jigs. And my application with this rod was far different than what it is right now. And nowadays, I tend to use this rod as a multi-purpose threat for largemouth. And with it, I have it mounted on, I have it paired up with an old school Curado with 12-pound monofilament Cortland line. And what I use this rod for nowadays is for everything again. Similar to that Mojo Bass jig and baits rod, this one handles identically the same stuff. But what I like about the Victory rod, obviously it's more lightweight than the Mojo Bass. It's got the greater flex too, which is super nice. So even though this is a medium heavy fast action rod, it's got that flex that's very important if you're fishing baits that have treble hooks. So again, where this rod really works nicely with is square bill crankbaits, the Man's Minus, which I throw a lot in early season right after ice out. You can also get away with some basic lipless cranking with this as well. You guys might laugh at me for this, but my all-time top producing bait during the spring season, the greatest of all time for me, the GOAT for largemouths, it's the cheapest bait that I own, and it's a Storm Wild Eye Shiner. It's a 3-inch hybrid between, the way the bait has been made and manufactured, a lot of people consider it as a standard paddle tail, but the way I treat that bait, it's kind of like a hybrid between a lipless crank. It's got the shape and profile of a lipless bait, but due to the wagging tail, it's also considered a swim bait paddle tail type of deal. So that bait, it's a compact little swim bait, 3 inches. And where the monofilament line comes very handy with, again, you're working a bait with treble hooks. You want that little slight advantage with the stretch in the line. And, with that bait in particular, I work it a lot and exclusively with the Grunt. And it is my top producing spring bait of all time for trophy largemouth, following ice out all through the pre-spawn period. So just like the last rod I showcased, all-purpose, dual-purpose threat. You can do anything with the Grunt. I know guys fish jig baits with this. They'll throw swim jigs with it. I do at times still as well, but where I really enjoy this rod is with casting search baits. It can also handle spinner baits as well as a top water during the summer months. And You know, I don't know what else specifically I can reveal about this rod other than it's very sensitive, very powerful, and it can do it all. And that's one of the joys about this rod in particular. You know, 1 year you'll get it for one intended purpose. Then, you know, you'll get into your exploratory phase, you'll brainstorm, and then say the next year, you'll find other uses and needs for it too. And that's ultimately what happened with the Grunt, and you know, kind of like my progression with this rod when I first started using it 3 years ago. Back then it was one of my jigging sticks. Now it's one of my search bait sticks and one of my early season weapons. So here's the specs and label on it. VTC71 medium heavy fast. Solid rod. So we're going to end the segment with these last two rods here behind me. They both serve for the same purposes. They're both the Rip and Chatter models for the Mojo Bass glass and then the Legend Tournament bass. So first things first, I guess I'll showcase both of them, and I'd like to talk about their differences as far as construction and design goes, and for the applications that they both serve for me. So the first rod I'd like to showcase here is the Mojo Bass glass. This is the Rip and Chatter. The specifications on this is it's a 7-foot 2-inch rod, has a heavy power and a moderate action. And the moderate action is what I really like about it when you're fishing rip baits, lipless crankbaits, and that chatterbait also. As you guys know, fishing a glass rod, it's a very, very acquired feel. These rods are far different than your typical bass rod. You know, it's not that carbon, it doesn't have that carbon or graphite rod construction. What this one does have is that integrated polycurve IPC mandrel technology. And also, it's got that S-glass. It's fully linear. So what typically plagues a lot of these glass rods is the butt section up until the midpoint. It's going to be probably very thick. And then even all the way up to the tip section, it could be a little bit too whippy. And that's one of the things that has plagued a lot of these glass-based rods. And where St. Croix really improved it is it's got that uniform streamlined shape. So from the butt end is definitely going to be the thickest point of the rod. And the way you want any rod to operate and function and be designed is once you get towards that tip section, you're going to want that rod to eventually narrow out and thin out. So think of it like, you know, like a pyramid shape style graph, you know, like a pyramid, a food pyramid. So consider the back butt end. It's going to have all that thickness, and that's where a lot of your power in the rod is going to come from. And then all the way up until you reach that tip point, it's going to have all that bend and flex that you're going to want when fishing a lipless crank as well as the chatterbait. And the nice thing about this S-glass in its linear shape and form is the casting. Back in the day, if you started fishing with the glass rod, the casting control was probably atrocious and god-awful, and that was just due to the design of rods then. And what's nice about this rod in particular is you have wonderful casting control. It's not whippy. It's a very, very well-structured rod that allows you to achieve long casts, and you'll be in control of those casts as well. So that's one of the benefits of this rod and what I really like about it as well. So the Rip and Chatter, again, I fish a lot of lipless cranks with it, heavier 1/2 ounce to 3/4 ounce sizes. I might even beef it up to a 1 ouncer if need be. And also chatterbaits, 1/2 ounce or heavier. And a lot of you guys were asking me last year, how does the Rip and Chatter rod handle the new chatterbait big blade that came out last year? And it handles it wonderfully. It's got enough power. I do recommend always to fish those baits. Any chatterbait in particular, always fish it with braided line. The thinnest line that you can get away with, I feel, works the best. You'll be able to get the most vibration and action out of that bladed bait. But this one here, faster gear ratio reel 731, and what I have spooled up on it is 20-pound master braid in moss green. And with this package, just because I have a lipless crank here, the Rip and Wrap that I worked very heavily last fall, I did run a 5 to 8 foot section of fluoro leader on it, just when dealing with that clear water for smallies. Working the rip baits, you do want that leader, but otherwise, anytime else, wherever I'm fishing for largies, no need for a leader, and you can just tie directly from braid to the bait, like I do normally. So this rod right here, it's a workhorse, but like I said, just like most glass rods, it's going to be an acquired feel. It's far different than your typical bass rod, so this does take some time getting used to, but once you'll hook into your first big fish, everything changes, and that's the way it all happened for me. So this is it right here. Mojo Bass Glass, the Rip and Chatter. So hopefully my description for the Mojo Bass Glass made sense. Unfortunately, I'm not a rod builder or designer, so at times I might be a little off on the specifications of it, and I'm, just describing the design process and the rod building process of it and how everything serves for, for practical uses then thereafter. So hopefully that made sense. If not, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And moving on, I have kind of its cousin right here. This is brand new rod that just came out late last year. This is the Legend Tournament Bass Rip and Chatter. And the main difference with this rod right here is, all the Legend Tournament rods, they're built with the FRS technology, the ART, and it's got that nice sexy blue finish like all the other rods. But a few select models that the Legend Tournament Bass came out with and that they wanted to build, it incorporates the not only the SC4 carbon fiber blank, but also the SC4 with IACT glass. So, a hybrid rod like this, the Rip and Chatter, it's got, not only does it have your carbon-based blank, but it also utilizes that S-glass technology also. So the IACT glass is far different than the S-glass. The X-glass is uniform throughout to have that flexy feel and whippier action. But this one right here, it's a carbon fiber hybrid, and on the website, which is right in front of me, it does utilize that active linear S-glass on the upper section of the rod. So I'd say the midsection down to the butt, it's going to feel like your traditional Legend Tournament bass. So it's going to be just awesome. It's going to be sensitive and powerful. And then when you get up to this tip section, it's going to have that nice flex. So even though this is a heavy moderate, you can see that whippiness to it. It's got that nice sexy flex right there. So where it's going to come into play, where this rod does get used a lot, for me, lipless crankbaits. So even though I tend to fish most of my chatter baits and lipless baits with braided mainline, what I have spooled up on here is 15-pound fluorocarbon. And what's nice about you still working those baits with fluorocarbon, it's going to be predominantly in your open water environment. So with lipless cranks on our clear bodies of water, that's where I'm going to be using this rod primarily. Launching baits far, in the springtime, whether I'm fishing largemouth or smallmouth, I'm always going to want fluorocarbon line in those types of environments, especially when dealing with clear water. And obviously with working a chatterbait, also in the early season, we don't have as much weed growth to deal with quite yet. So in those, in that type of a situation with the fluorocarbon, it can be used to your own benefit too. And you're not going to have to extract fish from heavy cover like I otherwise would with that Mojo Bass and the braided line that I have spooled up on that reel. But 15-pound fluoro on this one. Again, another fast action, higher speed gear ratio 731 on this. And this rod is very unique, and I do look forward to using it a lot more this coming spring. But like I said, last rod prior, it's got your full uniform S-glass technology, lipless cranks, chatterbaits exclusively with that rod, whereas this one, it's that hybrid build. It can handle the same thing plus probably a lot more too. So very unique rod here that I have in my hands. So as I've described and shown off here, when it comes to spring largemouth fishing in the Northwoods, you really don't need the most sophisticated gear in order to catch those fish. Largemouth in general are not picky eaters. You can get by with the most uniform, multi-purpose setups that you can think of. And what's nice about largemouth fishing, the way I like to do it, I only need a couple rods, and each rod can handle multiple applications and strategies, which is a nice thing. And as I've shown and illustrated, you only really need to consider maybe one or two medium, heavy, fast action rods. Definitely incorporate one S-glass style rod for your lipless baits and chatter baits. And if you can also consider one standard medium fast action rod too, and that'll handle all of your largemouth needs in the early season too. So the rods that I've shown might not be the ones that you tend to favor or prefer for your early season largemouth fishing, but again, the whole purpose of this is to just do a show and tell about what I use, how I use them, and how you can consider using them if these rods will also apply to you and the type of fishing that you like to enjoy as well. So if you made it this far right now, again, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully I'll be able to get more videos and how-tos up on this page and elsewhere throughout my site, and you are utilizing this information for your own benefit and for your own successful fishing that you can do this season. Thanks again, and stay tuned for more.